Donald Trump didn't just build buildings, he built a character the world couldn't stop watching. Long before politics turned his name into a daily headline, Trump was already a brand. Loud, gold-plated, larger than life, designed to dominate attention. And attention, in his story, isn't a side effect, it's the fuel. Here's the hook most biographies miss. Trump's rise isn't only a business story, and it isn't only a political story. It's an entertainment story about how publicity can be converted into power, how a name can become a product, and how controversy can operate like a machine that keeps the spotlight permanently on. Some people see a master marketer, others see a lightning rod. Either way, the result is the same. He stays at the center of the frame. Tonight, we're rebuilding the full timeline in 7 parts, starting with the family roots and early mindset that shaped his win-or-lose worldview, then tracing how real estate expansion turned into a signature name, how television amplified the persona into mainstream culture, and how that celebrity energy became influence on a scale most public figures never reach. Then we'll step into the controversy engine, business disputes, media backlash, and the legal storms that have followed him for years, carefully separating what's documented from what's debated. Because the real question isn't simply who is Donald Trump. The real question is, how did one man turn fame into a force so powerful that millions couldn't look away, even when they disagreed about everything? Before Donald Trump became a headline, he was a son growing up inside a very specific kind of American ambition, one built on real estate, reputation, and the belief that image can be as valuable as the thing you're selling. His early life in Queens wasn't the glamorous Manhattan myth people associate with him now. It was a training ground, shaped by a family environment where success wasn't abstract. It was measured, pursued, and expected. The most important influence in this chapter is the mindset that forms early, a worldview built around winning, dominance, and public perception. In families where business is the language of daily life, children often learn 2 lessons before they learn adulthood. First, that the world is competitive, and second, that being underestimated is dangerous. That kind of environment can create a lifelong hunger, not just to succeed, but to be seen succeeding. Trump's early story is also where you start to see the first version of his most consistent strategy: attention management. Long before television and politics, the playbook was already taking shape. How to project confidence, how to frame yourself as the main character, how to turn setbacks into battles, and battles into publicity. This isn't about whether those choices are admirable or troubling. It's about understanding the mechanism. He learned early that the public is drawn to certainty, and he built an identity that performs certainty at full volume. Family business dynamics matter here because they don't just teach skills, they teach identity. If your world revolves around deals, negotiation, and influence, you begin to treat life like a transaction, leverage in, leverage out. You learn to measure relationships by loyalty, outcomes, and optics. You learn that you can't control what people think, but you can influence what they see. And that becomes the emotional engine behind the Trump persona later. Never look weak, never look unsure, never look like you're losing. That rule can produce a certain kind of confidence, but it can also produce conflict, because the moment you're committed to appearing like a winner, compromise starts to feel like surrender. This chapter also explains why his later fame doesn't follow the typical celebrity pattern. Many public figures become famous and then learn to handle publicity. Trump, in many ways, learned to handle publicity first, then used it as a tool in every arena he entered. The brand came before the myth, before the myth came before the power. And in the next part, we'll watch that mindset move from family foundation into real-world expansion, where Trump stops being a name inside Queens real estate circles and starts turning Trump into a product the country can recognize. The business chapter of Donald Trump's story is where Trump begins to shift from a person into a product. Real estate at its core is about location, timing, and financing. But Trump's version of real estate was also about something more modern: visibility. He wasn't only building or buying assets. He was building an image that could make those assets feel larger than life. This is where the pattern becomes clear. In a crowded market, the fastest way to stand out isn't always to have the best building, it's to have the loudest story. Trump's brand leaned into scale, luxury, and spectacle. The name itself became a kind of promise: gold, glamour, high status. And once a name becomes a promise, it can travel farther than the original business. It can be licensed. It can be stamped. It can become a symbol people recognize even if they've never stepped inside the product. Over time, the public began associating Trump not just with property, but with an entire identity: dealmaker, risk-taker, winner. That identity is powerful because it's simple, it's easy to remember, it's easy to sell. And it's emotionally satisfying, especially in American culture, where success stories are often told like sports. You're either winning or losing. But this chapter also introduces the vulnerable underside that will follow him later. The fact that when you build a brand on dominance, any setback becomes a threat to the narrative. Business is messy, markets shift, projects fail, partnerships collapse. And when your brand is your biggest asset, every rough chapter invites skepticism, criticism, and dispute. That's where controversy starts to appear, not as one single scandal, but as friction, disputes around deals, negotiations, public claims, and the gap between marketing and reality. What matters for the timeline isn't every detail of every project. It's the direction of the transformation. Trump becomes increasingly famous for being Trump. The brand grows beyond the balance sheet. The media attention becomes part of the strategy. The persona starts to feel bigger than the business itself. And once a persona becomes valuable, the next step is inevitable. You look for a platform that scales attention. Real estate can make you rich, but media can make you permanent. In the next part, that platform arrives: television. And with it, a version of Donald Trump is manufactured for mass consumption. The decisive boss, the symbol of power, the character people remember even if they don't follow the actual business story. Television did for Donald Trump what real estate could never do at the same scale. It turned a regional business figure into a national character. The Apprentice wasn't just a hit show, it was a branding machine. It packaged Trump into a weekly repeatable story where power looked simple, success looked dramatic, and authority looked absolute. In that format, nuance doesn't matter. Image does. The genius of the show wasn't only in the premise, it was in the role Trump played: the decisive boss, the man who can judge talent instantly, the symbol of high-stakes winning. Reality TV is never pure reality. It's a performance built from editing, structure, and repetition. And repetition is what makes a persona stick. Week after week, the audience saw the same message: Trump equals control. Trump equals outcomes. Trump equals the final word. This is where celebrity becomes a form of currency. People who had never read a business article about him now felt like they knew him, not as a complicated person, but as a clear character. And characters are emotionally powerful because they're easy to follow. They invite loyalty and dislike in equal measure, but most importantly, they hold attention. The Apprentice era also teaches a crucial lesson about modern fame. When people bond with a media persona, they often carry that bond into real life. The line between entertainment and authority starts to blur. The audience doesn't just watch the character, it trusts the character. By the end of this chapter, Trump's brand has evolved again. It's no longer the real estate guy, it's the boss. And once the public sees you as the boss, you can step into arenas that normally require different credentials, because your fame becomes the credential. In the next part, we follow the leap that shocked some people and thrilled others: celebrity energy converted into political influence, where the camera-ready persona becomes a force that reshapes the national conversation. The moment Donald Trump stepped from entertainment into politics, it didn't feel like a typical campaign launch. It felt like a format change, like the same character had walked off a TV set and into a real-world arena where the stakes were suddenly national. And whether people loved him or hated him, the shift proved one thing immediately. His greatest advantage wasn't policy detail, it was attention control. When Trump formally announced his presidential run on June 16, 2015, the event itself was staged like a spectacle. Family present, crowd energy, a clear "I'm in" moment designed for maximum coverage. The reaction was instant and polarizing, which only amplified the visibility. Most candidates spend months trying to break through the noise. Trump arrived already as noise, and in modern media, noise travels faster than nuance. What made the leap work, at least as a communication strategy, was how familiar the persona felt. People didn't need to meet Trump. They recognized him. Reality TV had already trained audiences to read him as decisive, combative, and headline-ready. Politics, especially in the social media era, rewards those traits because conflict generates clicks, clips, and conversation. In that environment, every controversy can become free advertising, because outrage and fascination both keep the camera rolling. This is also where the public split into two competing interpretations that still define him. To supporters, he looked like a disruptor, someone who spoke differently, attacked the system, and treated politics like a negotiation. To critics, he looked like a performer, someone turning civic life into a constant show. The point isn't which interpretation is correct. The point is that both interpretations are emotionally intense, and emotional intensity is what fuels loyalty, backlash, and nonstop engagement. Trump's campaign style leaned into moments that produced instant reaction: sharp slogans, direct attacks, rally energy, and a constant media presence that made it hard for anyone else to dominate the cycle. Politics became a theater where he understood the lighting better than most people on stage. And then came the crucial shift. Once a celebrity enters politics, every headline becomes either proof of strength or proof of danger, depending on the viewer. And that makes the next chapter inevitable. Because when a figure becomes that polarizing, controversies don't just happen to them. Controversy becomes the engine that keeps them at the center of everything. By the time Trump becomes a permanent figure in public life, controversy stops being an occasional chapter and starts functioning like an engine. Not because every headline is equal, but because the attention cycle around him is designed to turn conflict into visibility and visibility into power. To understand why he remains so dominant in the media frame, you have to see the controversies in categories, not as random explosions. First, business and brand controversies. Trump's public identity has always been tightly tied to the value of his name. Trump as a promise of luxury, winning, and status. That kind of branding strategy can be enormously effective, but it also attracts constant disputes and skepticism because it blurs the line between marketing and reality. When your name is the product, every challenge, financial, reputational, or legal, feels like a challenge to the brand itself. Even years after his original celebrity rise, the pattern continues. In late January 2026, Trump and related plaintiffs filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS and the Treasury Department over leaked tax records, framing it as major reputational and financial harm. Second, media backlash and the headline battlefield. Trump's relationship with the press has long been adversarial, and that conflict is part of the machine. In modern politics and celebrity culture, negative coverage doesn't always weaken a figure. It can harden loyalty among supporters, intensify opposition among critics, and keep the spotlight locked. That's why the same event can be interpreted in opposite ways, and why the noise never truly fades. The public isn't just reacting to Trump, it's reacting to what Trump represents in their own worldview. In this atmosphere, even unrelated stories can be pulled into the orbit of his name, because Trump coverage reliably generates attention. Third, legal storms, filings, and procedural battles. This is the category where the story becomes most complicated and most important to tell carefully. The key is to separate allegations, procedural moves, and outcomes, because they are not the same thing. For example, in early January 2026, reporting described how the Manhattan District Attorney's Office opposed Trump's effort to move the New York hush money criminal case into federal court, arguing it involved private conduct rather than official acts. That doesn't resolve the case. It shows how legal fights can continue through procedure, jurisdiction, and strategy, not just courtroom drama. And some legal storylines don't end with a trial at all. In the federal classified documents case, the timeline has included indictments, delays, dismissal, and later procedural outcomes described in public reporting and reference summaries, illustrating how major cases can shift direction dramatically over time, especially when appeals, judicial rulings, and institutional policies intersect. When you combine these three stacks, brand disputes, media conflict, and legal battles, you get the central mechanism of the Trump era, a public figure who exists in a constant state of narrative collision. Supporters see persecution or resilience, critics see accountability or danger, but everyone keeps watching. And that leads to the final question of the documentary: why can't the world look away? Because at this scale, Trump isn't only a person in the news, he's a format the news keeps reproducing. Donald Trump's lasting impact isn't only in what he built, what he hosted, or even what offices he held. It's in how he proved a modern truth. Fame can be converted into power, and controversy can keep that power fed. He turned branding into identity, identity into a media engine, and the media engine into influence that refuses to fade quietly. Love him or hate him, the mechanism is the same. The story keeps renewing itself because attention is the currency.